Hello everyone, my name is Amber Martinez and this is my interpersonal communication project for my Human Services Counseling 508 course at Liberty University. I provided a PowerPoint slideshow to follow along with this presentation. I will alert you when you should proceed on to the next slide so that we all remain on the same page. Next slide. With this presentation, we will tackle a handful of topics related to developing and maintaining healthy and effective interpersonal communication interactions in different environments, including my personal life and work life. I will speak on my overarching goal of interpersonal communication, how my personal background has an effect on my communication skills, what a behavioral blend is and the positive and negative aspects of my behavioral blend in relation to my overarching goal, what my communication barriers are, some useful resources and strategies to tackle my goal, and my actual action plan to make my goal a reality. Next slide. My overarching goal of interpersonal communication is to become a balanced communicator. This incorporates many aspects that I tend to have issues with. It's understanding how to be both an equally effective talker and listener. It's understanding how to relate to others while communicating without overstepping your boundaries. Finally, it means how to be an empathetic listener and speaker without overindulging in emotions to bring on the flat brain theory as mentioned in the Peterson text. Throughout this presentation, I will tackle how these issues affect me while also explaining how I can improve on these issues and why it's best for me to address these issues early on. I will speak on the differences of interpersonal communication between my personal and work life. Next slide. I will first begin by speaking about my background and how it influences my interpersonal communication skills. These three aspects are my age, my family structure, and my current profession. Let's start with my age. I am a 23-year-old millennial raised in the age of technology. Technology is the issue my generation has many interpersonal communication issues with. We are so used to communicating via social media that we lack the basic face-to-face interpersonal communication skills relating to being both a listener and a talker. As for my family structure, I'm the youngest of two raised in a military family. My father spent 26 years in the Navy, and his need for structure and obedience reflected in the way both my brother and I were raised. From a young age, it was inappropriate to question his authority, to always obey what both him and my mother said. Because of this, I believe that I'm a better listener than talker in different interactions, and as he said, I want to achieve that balance. I rarely question what others say, leaving many misunderstood messages communicated to me unclear. Also, due to the lack of questioning I had as a child, I tend to have issues with communicating in tough or stressful situations. In other words, confrontation is not easy for me to handle. As for my work life, I work in a secure detention facility as a detention specialist. In other words, I work in a juvenile jail as a corrections officer. I work in an environment where teens have an issue with communicating effectively, and I must be the helping hand to help them do so. Next slide. My background has really shaped myself and my personality. At the beginning of the semester, I took a behavioral blend assessment and was given a result that showed me many different things relating to my personality. This behavioral blend assessment is shown in a 4-quadrant draft known as the DISC graph that shows whether a person is task-oriented versus people-oriented, and active or outgoing versus passive and reserved. Many different combinations of personality can be created with this assessment. This assessment is all about personalities and helps people understand why they do what they do, why they act the way they act, and what traits may describe them best. There are many advantages and disadvantages to each behavioral blend. The advantages and disadvantages are all dependent on the audience, or the person or people you're communicating with, and the communication setting, or the environment we communicate in, whether it's family life, work life, place, or the church. Next slide. CIS is the behavioral blend that is best fitted for me. CIS stands for Competence Influencing Specialist. A few personality traits attributed to this behavioral blend is passive, people-oriented, equal reserved and outgoing, inspiring, relational, and organization and structure-oriented. Next slide. I will now tackle the positive and negative aspects of my behavioral blend. Next slide. In the personal aspect of my life, there are two positive aspects of my behavioral blend that assist me in interpersonal communication that I feel take advantage of when communicating with others. The first is relating to friends and family helps build strong relationships. The second is being comfortable with communicating with others on different levels. See, I build strong relationships with my friends and family and feel that I'm a very laid-back person, which allows others to open up to me. This comfort allows people to effectively communicate their message to me. My understanding of their comfort level builds my confidence and allows me to be a better listener. In the work aspect of my life, being the SOAR behavioral blend is a blessing. Human services field is great for those who are people-oriented. Human services normally calls us for a career working with those in difficult, stressful situations, so liking to be with and around others is very important. Next slide. However, there are also some negative aspects of my behavioral blend as well. In the personal aspect of my life, organizational structure is not always best in a family or relaxed environment. Family and friend interactions are rarely planned, and which does not allow for preparation of communication of messages. In stressful situations with family members, I tend to become emotional and cannot pull my thoughts together quickly to effectively communicate them. Many times this leads me into entering the flat brain theory as described by Peterson in the text, Why Don't We Listen Better? Normally, in tough or stressful situations, we go through an emotional overload, causing our message to be communicated ineffectively. The main issue I have. In the work aspect of my life, being people-oriented and relational could hurt me. I become close to many of the kids that I work with. I spend so much time with them each day that I sometimes step out of the role of staff and enter into a motherly role. Some see this as overstepping my boundaries as a quote-unquote detention specialist. Also, my passive nature is not best for this environment either. The environment I work in has a lot of confrontation and many situations that are stressful. I sometimes struggle with confrontation, like I mentioned earlier, and my communication tends to shut down when that happens. My mind tends to jumble, and knowing what to say and how to say it becomes an issue. Like stated above, this leads to my involvement in flat brain. Next slide. To address these negative traits, I have to understand that in my personal life, I am not always in control, and sometimes I have to let things take its course. When it comes to tackling tough situations in the workplace and confrontation, I must understand that I must be the calm and centered person in that type of environment in which I work in. When it comes to close relationships, I must understand that what I do is still a profession and must treat it as such. Also, becoming too close to who I work with or for could allow for many issues in the workplace to follow me home. I am a strong believer in understanding that work should stay at work and home should stay at home. Being at my job for almost a year, I have learned to handle many confrontations. However, not all confrontations and stressful situations in that type of environment mirror ones in the past. As for being passive, I must understand that saying what people want to hear or doing what they want to do is not always best for the situation. Next slide. When it comes to communication in personal or work life, barriers can stop me from achieving my overarching goal of being a balanced communicator. These barriers are addressed by whether I assume the role of either the talker or listener in communication. Next slide. As a talker in communication, I tend to encounter the following: jargon. Many times I get so into what I speak on that I forget that others may not understand some of the terminology I use depending on what I'm talking about. Advanced vocabulary. When speaking to the kids at work, I tend to forget that they are in middle and high school and they can't really follow what I say when I use some advanced vocabulary. Irrelevant details. Irrelevant details can cause people to lose track of my message, and I tend to add a lot of those in the stories I tell. Scattered thoughts and opinions. When I get excited about a topic, I speak before I think, causing an overload of information, leading me to speak on things out of order, which may cause misunderstanding of messages. And emotions. Like I mentioned, when my emotions are at a high, whether happy, excited, upset, or all of the above, this overload of emotion causes flat brain. Next slide. As a listener in communication, I tend to encounter the following barriers. Differences in perception. When someone sees something completely different than what I do, I tend to start thinking about that and not listening to the actual message. This also causes me to miss out on important indicators mentioned by Stewart in our text like tone, body language, and emotional connectivity. Emotional distraction. With an overload of emotions, the flat brain theory comes into play with not only the talker but the listener as well. Misunderstanding the message. This common barrier, or not understanding the meaning of the message or misunderstanding it, could distract me as a listener, causing me to stop listening and to begin thinking of probing questions to ask. Next slide. I will now speak on the resources and strategies I plan to use and have used to help me tackle my communication barriers that I have. Next slide. One of the big resources I have used and plan to use in the future is a text we read in class, Why Don't We Listen Better? Communicating and Connecting in Relationships, written by Jim Peterson. Now, I don't just say this book because it was a required text in class, but it is a book that has many tips and techniques that I can use in many settings like work, family life, church, and many other communication environments that I find myself in. Strategy I use is trial and error. Sometimes messing up and learning from your mistakes is the best way to improve. Finally is practice. Peterson explained that the strategies he offers will not come naturally automatically. It takes practice and patience to perfect them and to allow them to become second nature. Next slide. I will now speak on my action plan related to enlarging the conversation and making my overarching goal into a reality. Next slide. In enlarging the conversations, we all must understand that no one is a perfect communicator. That includes being a perfect listener or talker. Being a balanced communicator means multiple things. Being a balanced listener and talker, always striving to be better as both, understanding that both are equally important in interpersonal communication. Also, understanding how to be an empathetic communication versus being too emotionally involved. Next slide. What can I do to make my goal of being a balanced communicator reality? Like Peterson said in his text, communication skills will only become second nature with practice. It may be awkward at first, but trying to implement some of the aspects in his text and techniques over time, it will get better. And the second thing is being open to making mistakes. As mentioned earlier, the best way to implement the strategies to improve communication is trial and error. It's okay to open up and be vulnerable when trying to improve on something new. You learn more when you step out of your comfort zone. Finally, understand that improvements can always be made. Always strive to be a better interpersonal communicator tomorrow than you were today. Your family, friends, clients, and self will be better off in the end. Next slide. And remember this quote, what you get by achieving your goals is not as important as what you become by achieving your goals. Zig Ziglar. Thanks for watching, and I wish you all the best in achieving your interpersonal communication goals.